Okay, sorry for the small technical intervention. So welcome everyone on this talk on quantum computers versus modern cryptography. My name is Kristof Verslype. I work at Smalls is an ICT provider for the Belgian Public Services, and I work at the research department. At the research department, I'm responsible for everything that has to do with cryptography. So in the media, we regularly read articles about quantum computing, about their impact on modern cryptography. Sometimes these articles, they have quite dramatic titles. Sometimes they are hard to interpret. I will give 6 examples. This is the first one, an important one, an article published by Google in Nature, which you all know, where they claim quantum supremacy. What does that mean? 2 years later, 2021, China claims quantum primacy. What does primacy mean? 2022, experts warn of apocalypse, of a quantum apocalypse. It's a threat to our way of life. That's quite scary, no? Then, another one that is not very reassuring. A new attack easily knocks out a potential encryption algorithm that was a contender for post-quantum computing. Then, Financial Times, 2023, January 2023, Chinese researchers claim to find a way to break encryption using quantum computers. That's also a very scary one, right? And then the final one I would like to show is artificial intelligence helps to crack the NIST recommended post-quantum encryption algorithms. Also not very reassuring. So, should we go into panic mode? Is the quantum army advancing at a rapid pace? So, I would like to shed some light on this issue, on this topic, with my talk, which consists of 4 parts. The first part is about quantum computers in theory. How do they work on a very high level? It's very okay. On a very high level, and also what is their theoretical power? Then we go to quantum computers in practice. Where are we today? Why is it so hard to build them? The third part is the crypto apocalypse. What is the impact of sufficiently powerful quantum computers on our modern cryptography? And then the final part is quantum-resistant cryptography. How can we defend ourselves against this threat? So let's start with some theory. So you all know that on classical computers, the smallest units of computation, that is the bit, which has the value 1 or 0, and on the physical level, it is represented as a physical charge. When we talk about quantum computing, the smallest unit of computation is the qubit. Qubit, which is a subatomic particle, it's not really a particle, but okay, such as a photon or an electron. And an electron, if we take an electron as a qubit, it can have a spin, clockwise or counterclockwise, 0 or 1. However, if you are on the quantum level, on the subatomic level, these particles can have very weird behaviors. They can, for instance, be in a superposition. And say it very simply, it means that our electron, if our qubit is an electron, that it can spin a bit clockwise, and at the same time it spins a bit counterclockwise. Until, and that's also weird, until the moment we observe it, until the moment we measure it. Then our value of our qubit becomes something concrete. The spin is clockwise or counterclockwise, one of the two, 0 or 1. And then there's also the aspect of entanglement. Look, it's a kind of weird connection between qubits, between, for instance, electrons again, that even Einstein had difficulties with. Although, meanwhile, this theory of entanglement has already been confirmed with high probability. Okay, on the bottom left of the screen, you see the layout of the Sycamore processor quantum computer which has been built by Google, which you have seen in this article in Nature. Every gray cross represents a qubit. So together we have 53 functioning qubits. And together all these qubits, they form the quantum state of our quantum machine. On a classical computer, on the lowest level, we do computations using logic gates, such as the AND gate, the NOT gate, the OR gate, you know these things. When we talk about quantum computing, we also have gates, which are far more complicated. We call them the quantum logic gates. And it allows us to move from quantum state A to quantum state B to quantum state C, and so on. It allows us to execute quantum algorithms. So, what is important, an important property when you talk about quantum algorithms, that's the circuit depth. It's the longest sequence of quantum logic gate executions. It is an important property. Why? Because the longer the circuit depth, the harder it will be for a quantum computer to execute this algorithm. Okay, so far the theory in a nutshell. I have here on my presentation a statement. Quantum computers will be able to solve all problems that are difficult or even impossible for classical computers. Think for a moment to what extent you agree with this statement. It's a bit of a misconception. It's a misconception, and what I also have observed also with other technologies such as Bitcoin, blockchain, and artificial intelligence is that when people do not understand the technology very well, we sometimes have a tendency to attribute quite mythical properties to it. We do the same with quantum computers. And then the question is, of course, okay, what is now the theoretical power of quantum computers? Well, I would like to put them in 4 categories. In the first category, we know that theoretically, quantum computers will have no added value compared to classical computers. We talk about problems that are intractable. Intractable, such as the halting problem, which some of you may still remember from the courses in computer science. It's an example from theoretical computer science. The halting problem, no program can be written that can predict whether or not any other program halts after a finite number of steps. That's a halting problem. Then there is a second category of problems where probably quantum computers will have no significant value, no significant added value. As an example, I would like to take the traveling salesman problem, which is again an example from theoretical computer science. In a nutshell, given a list of cities and the distances between each pair of cities, what is the shortest possible route that visits each city exactly once and returns to the origin city? Then the third category is the category of problems where quantum computers, sufficiently powerful quantum computers, will potentially have added value, such as deep learning. We're not 100% sure yet, but we have reasons to believe it will be the case. And then the fourth category, that's the most interesting for us, it's a category where we are sure that sufficiently powerful quantum computers, they will have an added value. For instance, simulations of natural processes on a very small level, on the quantum level, on the very large level, and the astronomical level, but also on the in-between level, such as weather simulations. And then, and that's most important for our talk of today, we are sure that sufficiently powerful quantum computers, they will be able to break large parts of our modern cryptography. So in summary, quantum computers, they are based on quite unintuitive principles from quantum physics. The calculations happen on a different level, a totally different way compared to classical computers. Smallest unit of computation is a qubit, and are on paper, today on paper, powerful, but only for a limited group of problems, right? So there is quite some uncertainty, which is also well expressed by Koen Bertels, which is the head of the Quantum Computer Architectures Lab at the Technical University of Delft in the Netherlands, who said, look, how many times faster quantum computers will be remains to be seen. Maybe 10 times, maybe 100 times. Some even talk about 100 million times faster. So there is quite some uncertainty, and despite, or maybe thanks to this uncertainty, you see that there are a lot of efforts in quantum technology worldwide. Estimates for this year are at $36 billion, which is quite a lot of money, will increase also in the coming years. Quantum technology, efforts in quantum technology, that's mainly 2 types of technology. On the one hand, quantum computing, on the other hand, also quantum communication. There are 2 different technologies, but both based on principles from quantum physics. So, quantum communication, or quantum key exchange, it is one way, not the most practical way, but it's one way to protect ourselves against the threat of powerful quantum computers when we talk about data in transit. And in Belgium, when it comes to quantum technology and initiatives, I think the most important one I'm aware of is the Belgium Quantum Communication Infrastructure Project, which focuses not on the quantum computing side, but on the quantum communication side. Okay, so far the first part, quantum computers and theory. Let's go to practice. Let's go again to this Sycamore quantum computer that has been built by Google that you have seen in Nature, where they talk about quantum supremacy. What does this term mean? Well, it means less than what you would intuitively think. It means that a quantum computer is able to solve one problem that a classical computer in practice cannot solve. So one problem that in reality is totally useless suffices to have this state of quantum supremacy. And that's indeed what they did at Google, or at least what they tried to do, because already a few days after this publication in Nature, IBM refuted these claims. And they said, IBM, look, what they did, conservatively speaking, a classical computer can do it in 2.5 days with a higher accuracy. And what's also interesting to see is that 3 years later, in 2022, researchers were able, with classical computers, to beat Google's quantum computer and the Sycamore quantum computer. But of course, that's 3 years later. So meanwhile, of course, also more powerful quantum computers have been built. Okay, let's go to this quantum primacy. What does that mean? Well, it's basically the same as this quantum supremacy. The term supremacy has been abandoned. Why? Because of ideological associations. So 2 years later, 2021, China, researchers in China, they claimed that they reached this quantum primacy, and this time it has not really been disputed. So, but again, it was a totally useless problem, again, tailored on quantum computers. So the response, again, it was not really contested, although 1 year later, researchers were able to improve classical algorithms, and classical algorithms were in the end still able to solve that problem, that useless problem, although it took the classical computer a few months. So what is interesting to see is that there is this catch-up process by classical computers, but yeah, this catch-up process will become harder and harder as quantum computers become more powerful. And it is, of course, likely that sooner or later, quantum computers will be able to perform certain useful tasks better than conventional computers. What you see here is a timeline of quantum computers. The first quantum computer has been built in 1998, had 2 qubits. Meanwhile, the most powerful quantum computer is the IBM Osprey, which has been launched previous year and has 433 qubits. That's where we are today. In the middle, more or less, of my slide, you see, again, our Google Sycamore processor. What is also interesting are the 2 orange machines, the 2 D-wave machines. You see that they have much more qubits. Does that mean they are so much more powerful? No. These machines are based on other principles from quantum mechanics. They are not the so-called universal quantum computers, and the black ones on my timeline, that pose a threat on the long term for modern cryptography. So they are a bit out of scope. They are also focusing on other type of problems, such as optimization problems. Okay, so 433 qubits, that's where you are today. On this slide, you see also a bit the history. And another interesting question is also, what can we expect in the upcoming years? And this becomes clear in the development roadmap by IBM. You see that this year, which means in a few months, they would like to launch their Condor machine, which would be the first universal quantum computer with more than 1,000 qubits, which I think would be a big feat. What you also see, and that's interesting also for the rest of my talk, is that they aim for a kind of exponential growth. Exponential growth, which means that the number of qubits doubles every X months, roughly speaking. Okay, I talk, and I will talk a lot about the number of qubits, but it needs to be said that the number of qubits does not say everything. I already pointed towards the D-wave machines which have much more qubits but are not necessarily more powerful. Also, what's important, the qubits, they have noise, and the more noise they have, the less accurate they are, of course, and the less powerful the quantum computer will be. So this noise level is a very important one, which we'll also encounter again later in my talk. So, why is building a quantum computer so complicated? I will give 3 reasons: isolation, error correction, and scalability. Isolation. Well, the quantum state, our 53 qubits in our Sycamore quantum computer, for instance, this quantum state is very, very sensitive for external interference. So what we do, we put it in a large fridge at temperatures close to the absolute zero, minus 270 something, and we shield it as much as possible from vibrations, from light, from magnetic radiation. This all in order to maximize what we call the coherence time. That's the time, the period that the quantum state is maintained correctly. And to give you an example, Again, our Google Sycamore computer, what is this, the coherence time? Well, we have to think in tens or hundreds of a microsecond. A microsecond, you know this, 1 millionth of a second. Also, we manipulate, of course, the quantum state by applying these quantum logic gates or by reading at the end the output. Also, these manipulations, they can introduce errors in our quantum state. It has to be said, however, that in recent years, when it comes to coherence time, a lot of progress has been made. But nevertheless, most scientists seem to agree that errors are most likely unavoidable. And this brings me to the second challenge, error correction. So, if errors are unavoidable, we need error correction. And how does it work on a very high level? Well, we take a group of set of physical qubits, which are noisy, and together they form a logical, a virtual qubit that is exact, or at least much, much more exact. That's a high-level idea. And what's also interesting about this idea that in the 80s and the 90s, researchers were still convinced, look, okay, nice idea, but it will never be possible. But nevertheless, previous year, 2022, we have seen the first experiments with error correction. Error correction, however, requires that the physical qubits, that they are not too noisy. If they are too noisy, you can't do this error correction. And then the question that some of you, without doubt, have in your head is, okay, how many physical qubits do we need to have one logical qubit? Well, the answer, as so often, is it depends. It depends on the noisiness of our physical qubits. If they are more noisy, we will need more physical qubits to have one logical qubit. And also, the thing I mentioned in one of my first slides is the circuit depth. And the longer a quantum algorithm is, the higher, the more physical qubits you will need to have one logical qubit. So, but this is an important distinction, physical qubits versus logical qubits, and that will come back later in my talk. The third challenge is scalability. So, we have seen that today, the most powerful quantum computers, universal quantum computers, they have a few hundred qubits, right? If quantum computers one day want to become a threat for modern cryptography, we don't need a few hundreds, but a few tens of millions of qubits. And the only way to get there is by having an exponential growth rate that is also maintained for a sufficiently long period of time. On my screen, on the slide, you see a picture about Moore's law. That's basically, we needed something equivalent for quantum computers. Moore's law is about classical computers. Okay, so I have given 3 reasons why building quantum computers is so complicated. I talked about isolation, about error correction, about scalability. So needless to say that the challenges there are quite huge, quite astronomical. Okay, let's go to the crypto apocalypse, the impact of quantum computers on modern cryptography. Modern cryptography, that's the cryptography that finds its roots in the end of the 60s, beginning of the 70s of the previous century. And historically, if we look at cryptography, historically, the focus was on protecting the confidentiality of data at rest. But nowadays, we see that cryptography is much, much, much more. We have a whole set of cryptographic mechanisms to realize a whole set of cryptographic security properties. We have, for instance, the big category of public key cryptography, where you find mechanisms such as authentication, key exchange, digital signatures, and public key encryption. There's also the category of symmetric cryptography. The main block, not the only one, but the main block is symmetric encryption. I will talk about these 2 categories, public key cryptography and symmetric cryptography. I don't have the time to talk about other mechanisms such as secure hashing, although that's a very important one. The only thing I can say about secure hashing is that the impact by sufficiently powerful quantum computers on secure hashing is similar as their impact on symmetric encryption. Okay, let's go to symmetric encryption. As most of you know, it means that the encryption and decryption is done with the same key, and the main goal is to protect confidentiality, right? Worldwide standard already for over 20 years is AES, Advanced Encryption Standard, which, by the way, is a Belgian product. It has been invented at the KU Leuven. Okay. So when we talk about breaking encryption, breaking a ciphertext, it usually means that an attacker is able to find the corresponding secret key to decrypt. And I would like to illustrate the impact of sufficiently powerful quantum computers on symmetric encryption with a toy example. In this toy example, we have a toy classical computer where data is encrypted with keys of length 6, with the size of 6 bits, which means there are 2 to the power of 6 potential keys, which is 64 potential keys. That's a search space where our attacker has to search, has to find the right key. That's also the chessboard that you see on the right of the slide. So, in case a good cryptographic, symmetric cryptographic algorithm is being used, the best strategy of the attacker is not much better than one by one testing each key separately. So on average, the attacker will find the key after 32 attempts. Okay, what changes when our attacker can use a sufficiently powerful quantum computer? Well, quantum computers promise a quadratic speedup. What does that mean? It means that our search space decreases from 64 to the square root of 64, which means 8, which means the search space that you see on the right, well, of our square, of our chessboard, only one row is remaining. One row with 8 possibilities, that's 2 to the power of 3, so the security reduces from 6 to 3. On average, our attacker will find the right key after 4 attempts. Fortunately, it's quite easy to mitigate this threat. We simply need to double the key length. So we go from 6 to 12 bits, which means the size of the search space on the classical computer, it's 2 to the power of 12, which is 4096. If our attacker has access to a quantum computer, the search space decreases to the square root of 4096, which is 64, which is again exactly the size of our original search space when our attacker only had access to a classical computer. In reality, however, we do not use keys of 6 bits, we use keys of at least 128 bits. So we just go to 256 bits and we have completely mitigated this risk. Okay, let's go to some more information. So this is all possible with Grover's algorithm. This attack is possible with Grover's algorithm, which is a quantum algorithm. The number of logical qubits that are required to break symmetric crypto, you can see it there. It's at least a few thousand logical qubits that are required to execute this algorithm. What does that mean on the physical level? Physical qubits, well, we need at least 10 million qubits. That's 10 of millions of qubits. Yeah, okay, at least more than 10 million qubits, physical qubits. Okay, so let's have a look at what the BSI thinks about this. BSI, that's the German Federal Office for Cybersecurity. So what they say in a document that's very interesting, they say, at the present time, there is no evidence that symmetric cryptographic mechanisms are threatened in any significant way by quantum computers. And in this document, they also give an analysis, which you see on the right in bold. So they say in case of AES 128, even if our attacker can run Grover's algorithm, it would take our attacker, if the attacker has access to one single quantum computer, it would still take around 30 years to break that key, which is still a long time. If we want to go from 30 years to 1 year, the attacker needs to have access to 900 quantum computers. So that's why the BSI says, look, the risk, there's not an immediate threat. However, what you do see is that many other organizations, they recommend, okay, you can take longer keys in order to mitigate this risk completely, which is also mentioned, by the way, in this article published by the BSI. So as a precaution, you can take your keys sufficiently long. Okay, let's go to public key cryptography. It means that we have key pairs. We have a private key, which is only known by one entity. We have a public key, which may be known by the whole world. If we talk about public key encryption, well, the whole world can encrypt using the public key, but only the holder of the private key can do the decryption. Digital signatures also uses public key cryptography. So signing a document is done with the private key, verifying the signature is done with the public key. And as I have already mentioned, also authentication and establishing secure channels also is based on public key cryptography. Most systems today are based on RSA or elliptic curve cryptography. Elliptic curve cryptography is considered the successor of RSA. So let's start with RSA. When we talk about RSA, we talk about prime numbers. Prime number, you all know this. These are numbers that are only divisible by 1 and itself, such as 2, 3, 5, 7, and so on. Each natural number has unique factorization in prime numbers. For instance, 12, that's 2 times the prime 2 multiplied by 1 times the prime 3, right? This brings us to the RSA assumption. RSA assumption says that there is no efficient algorithm for factoring a number that is the product of 2 large prime numbers. In practice, it is infeasible to do this when the primes are sufficiently large chosen. So here you see an example of such a number that is the product of 2 large primes. It has been published in 1991 as part of the RSA challenge. Only 29 years later, researchers have been able to break this, to factor it in its 2 prime numbers. This was done using classical computers. This required a lot of resources, and it took them 2,700 core years. Just to illustrate that this problem is a very hard one using classical computers. Powerful quantum computers could do this efficiently with an algorithm, a quantum algorithm that's called Shor's algorithm. So this number, RSA 250, you see it again on the white part of my slide. It's the largest number, RSA number that has been factored using classical computers. On the blue part of my slide, you see an example of an RSA 2048 number. It's these kind of numbers that we need to factor in order to undermine modern RSA cryptography. It needs to be said also that RSA 2048, it's widespread today, but it's being phased out. And then the question, of course, is, okay, what is the biggest number, the biggest RSA number that has been factored so far using Shor's algorithm by a quantum computer? And the answer is a little bit disappointing, or maybe I should say a relief, depending on how you see it. The answer is 21. Then, of course, the question is, that was done in 2012. Meanwhile, you have more powerful quantum computers. And the question, of course, is, okay, how many qubits do we need in order to break, for instance, RSA 2048? And that's shown in this slide. So in order to break RSA 2048, we need 4,096 logical qubits, or according to research under a set of assumptions, research done in 2019, we need 20 million physical qubits. Again, most powerful quantum computers today have 433 physical qubits. So I talked a lot about RSA, but Shor's algorithm, published in 1994, invented in 1994, with a small modification, it can also be used to break elliptic curve cryptography. And here you have an idea of how many logical and physical qubits are needed to break elliptic curve cryptography. You see P256, that's also an elliptic curve that is widespread nowadays. It's one of the NIST standards. We need 1,536 logical qubits to break this, or according to research done in 2022, 30 million physical qubits. So in summary, powerful quantum computers with tens of millions of physical qubits, they threaten public key cryptography. But, that's important, we're not there yet. Where are we today? Well, I stole this picture from a researcher at Oxford University. We are in the gray zone at the bottom left. There you see the quantum computer that exists today. In order to break modern cryptography, in order to break RSA, we need to move northeast, right? Northeast in order to break the RSA defense line, which you see in red on the top top right of the figure. So again, we need this exponential growth rate in order to threaten modern cryptography. What you also see, what's important to notice also is that both the x-axis and the y-axis, they are logarithmic scales. X-axis number of qubits, y-axis the error rate. That's the noisiness of our quantum machines. And what you see is we not only need more qubits, we also need to have a higher accuracy. So we need to have an improvement in both dimensions. Okay, so we see that we are quite far from breaking RSA, we are quite far from breaking elliptic curve. So how should we interpret this article that has been published earlier this year in the Financial Times? Well, it's simple. It's based on bad research. The claims are incorrect. So don't worry about this. Good. Let's go to our final part, quantum-resistant cryptography. What we have seen is that modern public key cryptography, such as RSA, digital signatures, or elliptic curve encryption, these mechanisms, they are built on top of assumptions. Assumptions that no longer hold under the presence of powerful quantum computers. So what we see in this case is that some assumptions, they no longer hold. Everything that's built on top of these assumptions, all these mechanisms built on top of it, they become insecure. So what we should do is we should come up with new cryptographic mechanisms that do basically the same thing, such as encrypting, such as signing and verifying signatures, but based on assumptions that remain valid even under the presence of sufficiently powerful quantum computers. And you can say, Kristof, a few slides ago, you have shown us that we are very, very far away from quantum computers that are sufficiently strong, so why do we need to worry? Well, I hope that Moscow's theorem can convince you. So let's take x, the time the data must remain secure. Let's say 20 years, that's not too much. Y is the time required for migration from the current as-is situation with your modern cryptography to the to-be situation with quantum-resistant cryptography. We will see in one of the next slides that this can take quite a while. So we take y is 7. So x plus y in our case is 27 years. And then we have z, the time from now until sufficiently powerful quantum computers are being built. I have no clue, but let's take z 22 years. 22 years, that's smaller than our 27, than our x plus y. So in that case, we have a problem. It means, look, imagine that there is an attacker. That is an attacker who today is harvesting, collecting a lot of encrypted data. Today, our attacker is not able to do the decryption, but what our attacker can do is he or she can store all this encrypted data for several years until our attacker has access to a sufficiently strong quantum computer. And at that moment, our attacker can decrypt the data that it collected many, many years ago at the moment that the data still has value, that the data should still have remained confidential. So this attack scenario that I have just described, that is the harvest now, decrypt later scenario. This scenario forces us to think a long time in advance, and it specifically applies on data in transit. That's why the NIST, National Institute for Standards and Technology in the United States, already in 2016 started a standardization procedure. Standardization procedure consisting of two parts. One part, public key encryption and key establishment algorithms. The other part was digital signature algorithms. Meanwhile, the NIST has selected 4 algorithms. 3 of them are digital signature algorithms. 1 of them is a public key encryption and key establishment algorithm. And we hope that next year, in 2024, these 4 algorithms will be standardized. So it takes quite a while. There is something that's a bit unfortunate. So we have 3 digital signature schemes that are being standardized. However, none of these 3 is as practical, as convenient as the digital signature schemes we have now based on modern cryptography. That's why, as you can see on the bottom of the slide, that the NIST in August 2022 launched a new standardization procedure specifically for digital signatures in the hope that meanwhile researchers will have come up with more practical quantum-resistant digital signature schemes. Okay, that's where we are today. How to interpret this article that I've shown before. A new attack easily knocked out a potential encryption algorithm. We are talking about Psych. Psych was a contender for post-quantum computing. Let's go back one slide. Psych. You see in the middle of the slide that in July 2020, that the NIST had selected 7 finalists, and from these 7 finalists, 4 algorithms will be standardized. It also selected 8 alternatives. Why? Well, it is possible that one of these new standards, it will turn out to be insecure one day. And then it's good, it's necessary to have a plan B, to have a backup, to have an alternative algorithm that is still considered secure. That's why the NIST selected these 8 alternatives. 4 of these alternatives are public key encryption key establishment algorithms. And of these 4 algorithms, indeed, one of them was Psych, and it has been broken, indeed, by people, researchers at the Catholic University of Leuven. So unfortunately, this article is correct. How about this article? Artificial intelligence helps to crack NIST-recommended post-quantum encryption algorithm. Here they talk about Crystal Skyber. I will go back to my timeline. Crystal Skyber is one of the 4 algorithms that is being standardized. It's the only algorithm that is a public key encryption and key establishment algorithm. That's Crystal Skyber. Has it indeed been broken? Well, if it's the case, that would be problematic. Well, unfortunately, it's not the case. This article made a mistake. Not Crystal Skyber has been broken, but an implementation of this algorithm has been broken. It is indeed true that these quantum-resistant algorithms, sometimes they are quite complex to implement, and the more complex they are, of course, the higher the probability that there will be vulnerabilities in it. And one of these vulnerabilities, indeed, had been found, detected with the help of artificial intelligence. But again, the underlying cryptography, the underlying mathematics is still sound as far as we know. Okay, let's go to some analysis by the NSA, National Security Agency, which, as you all know, the most known former employee is Edward Snowden. Okay, so on the blue screen in bold, you see a press release or an extraction from a press release that the NSA launched in 2000, that they published in 2015. It's a bit of a disappointing message. They said already in 2015 that elliptic curve cryptography is not the long-term solution many once hoped it would be. That's in 2015, and I don't think it's a coincidence that the NIST standardization procedure that you saw in one of my previous slides, that it started in 2016. Then in 2021, the NSA came with another press release in which they say, and I think that's very honest, the NSA does not know when or even if a sufficiently powerful quantum computer will ever exist. So it may be the case that in the future these machines will exist, but maybe they will never ever exist. We don't know. And you have to deal with this uncertainty. Another interesting aspect in this article was that they say, look, new cryptography can take 20 years or more to be fully deployed. 20 years or more. In my example, I had seven years, which was quite optimistic compared to this. Then the final article published by the NSA, I would like to talk about in this slide, has been published in 2022, where they say, look, it's a clear warning. Now is the time to plan, prepare, and budget for a transition. At the same time, they say prepare, but don't do the migration yet. We don't want to get ahead of the standards process. Wait until the algorithms by the NIST have been standardized. That's 2022, and I think that's also this article that led a bit to, that contributed to the Quantum Computing Cybersecurity Preparedness Act in the United States, which has been signed by Joe Biden in December 2022. And what does this law say? It says, look, in the US, federal agencies must develop a strategy for migrating to post-quantum cryptography within 6 months. We're not talking about migrating, we're talking about preparing migration to post-quantum cryptography. Okay, and then this law led to a joint publication by the NSA, by the NIST and by the CISA, and the Cybersecurity Infrastructure, Security Agency. So this was a joint publication. It's, I would say, read it. It's only 3 pages long, and it contains basically 5 recommendations. One of the recommendations is, okay, establish a quantum readiness roadmap. How do you want to go from the as-is situation with your modern cryptography that is quantum vulnerable to a situation, to the to-be situation with post-quantum, quantum-resistant cryptography? A second recommendation, which I think is very important, independent of the quantum threat, it's prepare your cryptographic inventory. So in your organization, it is important that you know where is cryptography used in your application, in what applications also is it used. What cryptographic mechanisms are being used, what are the parameters that are being used, such as the key length, such as the encryption mode when we talk about symmetric encryption. What are the security requirements? Why do we use cryptography, basically? What are the assets that are being protected? What is the value of these assets? Or stated differently, what is the risk in case these assets are compromised? What cryptographic libraries do you use? What cryptography is quantum vulnerable? And maybe it's also a good idea to already develop an idea of how difficult will it be to do this migration. So what you don't want, but many of you will see it, I guess, is that you have assets with high value that are quantum vulnerable, and at the same time, migration will be hard. But it's better that you spot this now than in a few years, because then you may be in troubles. Then there are also 3 other recommendations in this document, but they have to do with technology vendors, with your technology vendors, with the organizations in your supply chain. So it's only a 3-pager. If you have time to read it, do it. Okay. Let's go back to Europe. Let's go back to the BSI, German Federal Office for Cyber Security. So they also published in 2022 a document. In this document, they give at the end 13 recommendations. I have selected 2. First one is hybrid encryption, because that's a bit different to the recommendations you see at the other side of the ocean. What they say is, look, quantum-safe algorithms that are currently being standardized are not yet as well researched as the classical methods, such as RSA and elliptic curve cryptography. BSI, that's a bit disappointing, therefore recommends that post-quantum cryptography should not be used in isolation, if possible, but only in hybrid mode, which means in combination with classical algorithms. That's, of course, a complexity that no one really wants. It will also impact your performance, for instance. But what I expect is that in the next years, trust in these new algorithms will gradually grow. And then the necessity of this hybrid encryption will go down. And then after a few years, that's my expectation, the BSI will drop this recommendation. Another recommendation which is also important, again, independent of this quantum threat, is cryptographic agility. So it basically means that you do everything to build your applications, to have your applications in such a way that migrating from your current cryptographic mechanisms to new cryptographic mechanisms or changing cryptographic parameters and so on, that it is made as easy as possible. This term, crypto agility or cryptographic agility, it's a term that you will quite easily notice when you read about post-quantum cryptography. However, what I notice also is that it's rarely really defined. What does that mean? I tried to make this a bit more concrete on 3 levels. The first level is the level of your organization. Your organization needs to have organization-wide cryptographic policies that are, of course, compliant with standards, regulations, and recommendations. Why is this important? Well, what I also notice is that today, too often, decisions regarding cryptography, cryptographic mechanisms, cryptographic parameters, and so on, too often it's a choice made by individual teams on an ad hoc basis, by individual teams who often lack the required expert knowledge. So that's, of course, suboptimal. It leads to sometimes, unfortunately, wrong decisions and to a very fragmented landscape in your organization. During your project, during the whole application lifecycle, you can foresee scenarios for this migration. How do we want to migrate from our current cryptographic mechanisms to new cryptographic mechanisms? That's already something that you can think about during the development of your application. And regularly you can evaluate, okay, do we need now to evaluate, do we need to migrate to these new cryptographic mechanisms? Hey, I don't know, you can do it every year. And then when you are planning to do this, you of course should also have an idea of the impact this migration will have on the performance, on the stability, and so on of your system, because it is likely that there will be a performance impact. And then the third level is the level of your code. So it's always a good practice to do modular coding, that's one. And secondly, well, when we talk about cryptography, it's tempting to put names of your cryptographic mechanisms, to put parameters, to put them hard-coded in your code. And that's, of course, not a good practice. Another thing that is very tempting is just using the default values when you are communicating with your cryptographic libraries or cryptographic services. And, of course, this creates a kind of a lack of transparency that is not really good for the overview of, okay, what cryptography are we using and what of this cryptography is vulnerable. Okay, this is my last slide. It's some advice given by the vice president of, again, the German BSI. And he said, look, if I could give companies and organizations 3 pieces of advice as they prepare for quantum safety, they would be: 1, include the threat in your risk management system; 2, create a cryptographic inventory; and 3, implement and use cryptographic agility. So I thank you for your attention. Maybe there is still time for a question. Well, anyway, I will be at the booth of my company, Smalls, so we are also always searching for new employees. So if you're interested in Smalls or if you have further questions, you can always find me over there. Thank you for your attention.